Director on the International Board of the WZCC, the World Zarathustra Chamber of Commerce. First, just a few words regarding the WZCC for those of you who may not be fully aware. It is widely acknowledged that Zoroastrians have a rich, illustrious history of successful entrepreneurship. However, we can no longer rest on our laurels and on our past successes. The WZCC, therefore, aims to reignite the spirit of entrepreneurship and, to my mind, more importantly, ignite a passion for entrepreneurship in our next generation, our youth. We do all this by providing a platform at the chapter level as well as at the global level for networking and mentorship opportunities. As we all are working our way through the current global pandemic, the WZCC has very quickly adapted to a new paradigm, replacing face-to-face meetings and events with virtual ones such as this webinar, which, by the way, is an integral part of the global WZCC monthly virtual events calendar. Speaking of investing in and passing the torch on to our next generation, leads me to introducing our moderator for today's event, Zoran Saher. Zoran is a member of the WZCC Australia Sydney chapter and is also our committee's social media co-leader. Zoran has a master's in advanced journalism, is a model, actor, motivational speaker, and social media influencer. So he's just the right person for me to pass the torch on and also the proceedings. Zoran, all yours.
Thank you so much, Jimmy, for the wonderful introduction, and welcome everybody. All right, so just a quick introduction to our guest speaker today, Rustom Kanga, who in the early 1980s, Dr. Rustom Kanga, while working at the Digital Equipment Corporation, he led the team that built the world's first commercial artificial intelligence system. He was there for 22 years, finishing up as a vice president for Special Systems, the division that built computers for submarines and fighter jets. When he left, he founded iOmniscient to bring artificial intelligence to the field of multi-sensory analytics, which you will hear about today. Over 2 decades, that many technologies that the company has developed for security, traffic management, rail airports, manufacturing, and retail converged into an integrated solution for smart cities, which have been implemented in 60 countries. Organizations from China Fast Train to Disney World use the systems. In 2019, his company topped Gartner's list for the most comprehensive AI-based video analytics worldwide, ahead of companies like IBM, Microsoft, and NEC. Dr. Kanga graduated from IIT Bombay in 1973, and he has a master's in management, an executive MBA from INSEAD, and a PhD in finance from the London School of Economics. I welcome you, Dr. Rustom Kanga.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, friends, for joining in this session. I'm going to try and share my screen. Zoran, you're going to have to allow me to do that. Yes, there we are. I presume you can see that. So today we're going to talk about intelligence. We're going to talk about intelligence, and then I'll help you understand what is artificial intelligence. And then finally, we'll talk about how some of this can be applied to the pandemic situation that we are all in right now. So talking about intelligence, when you think about intelligence, you probably think about someone like Einstein. But let me tell you about Coco. Coco was a gorilla who was brought up in the United States and California by 2 psychologists who brought it up just as they would a little child. They would talk to it, they would read to it at night, and so on. And Coco died recently at the age of about 43. And in that time, she had learned to communicate, obviously not in language, but with sign language like deaf and dumb people, with a vocabulary of something like 1,000 words. And that's about the sort of IQ of a small child, 3 to 5 years old. So, you know, even an animal like that would have intelligence, as would, you know, frogs and birds and bees and they all have their own types of intelligence. So what is intelligence? When we as humans think of intelligence, we think of a number of things. We understand sensory perception. That means we see something and we know what it is. We do deductive reasoning. So if this, then that. We think about memory and experience. So we touch a hot stove, we'll remember it, we won't touch it again. We do creative thinking, like an apple falls on your head and you say, ah, that must be due to gravity, right? Not all of us do that, but some people do. Feelings, conscience, those, being able to love and hate, all that's part of our thinking capability. And ultimately, it's language. If you can't use language, if you don't have a word like love, then it's very difficult to actually appreciate what it is. So we have all these types of thinking. Artificial intelligence is about making computers think like humans. Now, obviously, we can't make them do all these things, but we have been able to make them do deductive reasoning. We have given them memory and experience. There are things that they can't do today. We can't make our computers feel. We haven't given them a conscience. We can't make them do creative thinking. So in my own team, what we've been focused on is multi-sensory artificial intelligence. Humans use their eyes, their ears, their nose to understand their environment. And that's what we built a system to do. We do video analysis, sound analysis, smell analysis, and I'll explain to you how all that works. So let's first start with an incident. You remember Brussels, I'm sure. There was a bomb that went off. This person on the right entered the airport and he blew it up. 30 people died. The point is, why did no one stop him? They had the world's best CCTV system. They had the best cameras, the best computers and so on, but nobody saw him. 3 days later, they caught him. But why did it take 3 days? They knew who he was. He was involved in the Paris incident 1 month before. So what was the problem? The problem was that people build these large CCTV systems with huge video walls with screens and so on, and they expect someone over there to actually watch it. And studies have shown that if you're watching just 2 cameras, after 10 minutes, you miss half the action. After 20 minutes, you see nothing at all. So don't expect this person to sit there and watch anything. I'm going to prove this to you. I'm going to give you a test, all of you, right? So now you're the security guard for the next 20 seconds or so. And look at these faces. If you see one of them, you tell me. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go. Only 4 cameras, so it should be very easy for you. Of course, it won't be easy. But this is the job that we give our guards, right? We say, here are 2,000 cameras. If Johnny walks in, you tell me, right? Let's fast forward you so that you get to some, you don't have to watch it all. Now, if you look at this camera over here, in the top left-hand corner, you'll see someone, a little red box around somebody's face. So we've found someone. The system will go in and it'll tell you on camera 1, it saw this person. But while you were watching camera 1, on camera 4, you didn't notice that somebody had left a bag and walked away. And that is, in fact, what these video analysis systems will do. So let me give you a different example. In Singapore, they had a riot in 2013. A bus ran over a laborer and it killed him. His friends got upset. They set fire to the bus. It became a riot. And in Singapore, they don't really like riots too much. So see the timing. At 9:23, the accident happens. At 9:25, police cars are there, 2 minutes. 9:31, 8 minutes, the ambulances got there. Then the fire brigade. In 1 hour, they've gone home. Next day, 24 people are charged. How can Singapore react in 2 minutes when in Brussels it took them 3 days? What was the difference? And the difference was that in Singapore, they'd implemented a system for automated response. And the way that works is the camera understands what's happening. And when I say the camera, we're talking about video, sound, and smell, of course. So it understands what's happening in the environment. It'll find the nearest responder, which could be the ambulance, the police, whoever. It'll tell them where to go and what to do. So I'm going to show you a little video now to help you understand how this works. So you can see over here, this is a scene. That person over there has left something and he's walking away. Now that object is obscured by people walking in front of it and you can barely see it. But the system has found it. Now, the person has long gone, but the system will next do something called a jump to event. It'll go back to the moment that the bag was brought in and it'll look for the person. It's found him, it'll find his face. We don't know who it is, but we know his face. Once we've captured his face, we can broadcast it across all the other cameras in the city and look for that person. So now we've found that person again over there. We don't know who it is. If we did, we could search our databases, and if he's a known person, we could pull out his information. But we may not know who it is. Most likely we don't. But we can still track him because we have his face. So we see him on one camera, then the next, and now he's at that red flashing camera. And from that camera, we can now find the nearest police person and say, go and catch this guy. The policeman will say, why do I have to catch him? Who is this? So you can send him all his information, whatever you have. You say, what has he done? And you can send him that jump to event video, which shows him what he's done. And so let's now go back and think about that video and see what actually happened over there. The first thing was we did object detection. How does that work? The system understands the background of the scene and it ignores everything that's moving. It noticed that an object had stopped moving, which was the bag. And it'll therefore say something's wrong over here. This bag shouldn't be here. Next thing is we have to actually know it's a bag, so we do object classification. It could be a child, it could be a little dog that's fallen asleep over there. So we need to know that it is in fact a dangerous object. After that, we need to see who left it in there, who left the bag there. So we do the jump to event. Then we capture the face of the person to see if we know who that person was who left the bag. In an airport, it might just be some poor little old lady who's gone for a cup of tea. And so you can then make a decision to ignore it. But assuming that the person is suspicious, you can then track the person from camera to camera to camera. And then finally, based on the GPS of the nearest responder, you can find the responder and tell them to take some action. The system continuously learns, so it understands what's happening. You know, as the scene goes from morning to night, the light changes and so on, and it'll understand all that. It also has a nuisance alarm minimization system to help reduce false alarms, so it knows the difference between, say, an object and a shadow or a tree moving and so on. So what was the benefit in Singapore? The benefit was reduced response time. It used to take them 25 minutes to respond to a street incident. They were able to reduce it to under 5 minutes. And the benefit of that, of course, is that it reduces congestion, because whenever there's a street accident, you have congestion. And more importantly, it helped the individual. If you're the person with your leg under the truck, then it certainly helps to get the ambulance 20 minutes faster. So you don't need those big control rooms with lots and lots of monitors and so on. Everything can be done on the smartphone. It works like a walking control room. So a guard walking around with a smartphone will do everything that he could have done in a control room. So the technology is based on several different capabilities. There's behavior analysis, you need license plate recognition, you need face recognition. These are all different aspects of video analysis. And today we have some 300 different use cases for different environments. And you just saw one of them in that video. But let me give you some other examples. So in Atlanta airport, a child got onto the conveyor belt and went down the chute by mistake, of course, and got hurt, and it was a big lawsuit. It wouldn't happen in some of the airports that have our system, because we can differentiate a child from a bag. If a child gets onto the conveyor belt will stop automatically. You remember Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. They found him the next morning in his prison cell. Well, it wouldn't happen in some of the prison cells that use our systems, like in Hong Kong and Bahrain, because the system will detect a potential suicide and it'll raise an alarm. So you can stop it and you can be there in 30 seconds rather than after 8 hours. In shopping malls, if you know who all the shoplifters are, because you do, normally they are caught, they're taken to the police let them go and they keep coming back. If you can recognize them in advance, you can help the guard keep an eye on them when they come back. One of the big problems also in shopping malls is people slip and fall, hurt their back and so on. And then of course they sue the shopping mall. So let me show you a little example of that. So in this video, you'll see somebody falling down and we'll detect it. Notice that the quality of the video is very poor. It doesn't matter. We can work on $10 Chinese cameras. Right? So over here, somebody's fallen down. We get the alarm. We can offer him a cup of tea. Hopefully he won't sue us and we'll keep going. In large events, such as football stadiums and so on, one of the key issues is figuring out how many people there are, counting the crowds, and of course, the many different attempts at counting. Our ability is to count things in crowds. So in an environment like that, we can say how many people in that little polygon. And of course, a human can't do that, not in real time, right? It would take him hours to do this. In construction sites, you want to know if people are wearing their helmets and their jackets and safety jackets and things like that. Again, in football stadiums, you worry about hooligans being in the crowd. So how would you detect that? Using face recognition. Now, this is not face recognition of the type you see in airports where you say, stand straight, take off your specs, don't smile, and so on. Here we are talking about doing things in crowded and uncontrolled environments like this one. And this is our strength, to do things in crowds. So hopefully if there was someone whom you want to catch, you would see them and you would be able to take the necessary action. Now, one of the key issues when you start talking about face recognition and so on, of course, one immediately thinks about the privacy issues. You know, do we have Big Brother watching us all the time? And to avoid that, all our systems are privacy protected. So, as you can see over here, all the faces are redacted. The guard cannot actually see anyone's face. The system can see them, but the guard cannot. And it's totally encrypted, so no one can go into the system and pull it out. However, if there is an incident, for instance, let's say there's a murder in a shopping mall, then an authorized person can go in and reverse that redaction and see who was involved, because ultimately you do want to catch criminals and so on. There is a lot of debate on whether technologies like face recognition should be used in our society. And it's a trade-off, it's a balance that we as a society need to make. This last year, the National Center for Lost and Exploited Children in the US said that there were 800,000 missing children in the US. Right? That's a very large number. And if you had your child missing, think about what trade-off you would make. How much privacy would you be willing to sacrifice to find that lost child? So this is a decision that society has to make. Are we willing to use these technologies for something like finding lost children? All technologies can be used for good or evil. And as a society, we've got to decide how we want to use our technologies. So we talked about video analysis. Let's talk about something else, sound analysis. Sound can be used for different things, for gunshot detection, for instance. So the system will detect a gunshot. You can determine the direction and location of where the shot came from. You can also go down to determining the type of gun that was used in the gunshot, right? So again, it makes the detection of the event much faster and helps you solve any criminal activity that was there. Smell analysis. What is smell? Let's talk about smell. If you think of a cup of coffee, right? You all passed a coffee shop and you smelt the aroma. Well, coffee is not just a single chemical. It's got something like 400 different molecules, which we as humans can smell because we've got sensitive noses. In fact, other animals like dogs and so on have even more sensitive noses, but certainly we can smell coffee. So how does that work? We have sensors which will receive the different molecules. It'll analyze what molecules there are in the air. And based on that, it can make a decision on what's involved. So this has been used for detecting sewage smells. And in fact, in airports, it has been used to detect if the toilets are smelling and whether they need cleaning. Let me talk about some of the latest uses of this technology. We've discovered that when people breathe out, their breath has certain types of molecules in them. And in fact, initial clinical tests have shown that just smelling the breath of a person is a good precursor for detecting lung cancer and breast cancer, and probably a whole bunch of other cancers. This is a very new area, of course, and in fact, we are still, looking at how one moves forward in a field like this, because it does require a lot of money to do medical systems. We talked about video, we talked about sound, we talked about smell. What is next? Well, we were dealing with nursing homes, and they said we have a problem. People tend to fall down, and they tend to fall down in the bathrooms, but you can't put up cameras in the bathrooms for privacy purposes, for privacy reasons. So what technology can be used for that? Well, if we can't use video, and video is based on light, what else can we use? So we've developed something called wireless analytics. You see, wireless uses radio waves, and radio is just another wave. It's a form of energy just like light. It's just a different sort of wave, and radio waves, as they interfere with each other, they bounce off objects and so on, you can see what happens. So we've you don't have to put a camera in the bathroom. You just put a little wireless router outside. And based on that, we can detect if somebody's fallen down in the bathroom. So that's the next wave of technology that is coming through. Now, with all these different use cases that we talked about, we've put together packages for different industries. So you have solutions for the oil and gas industry, or retail, or railways, or prisons, and so on. And when you have smart schools, smart hospitals, smart roads, and so on, that's ultimately what you call a smart city. Now, where does all this run? This is all software, so it runs on a little computer somewhere. And we built jointly with Intel, we've put together a little device like this called the IQ implant, on which it all runs. Now, it does say Intel inside, but in fact, it's actually Intel outside. What is inside is our software. Now, all this was going on merrily, and then came the pandemic. And many organizations like airlines and airports and hotels and so on found that there was no business for them, and the whole economy started shutting down. So we said, what can we use this technology for to help organizations during a pandemic? And we determined that there are still organizations that need to keep running. For instance, the post office needs to run. Organizations like Amazon and other logistics organizations. The utilities need to keep running. Electricity, water, gas. The hospitals need to keep running. The food manufacturing organizations need to keep running. And so to help them keep running, we adapted our technology into what we call an anti-contagion suite to ensure the safe operation of these different organizations that need to keep operating during a pandemic. And so the types of applications we built for them involve things like checking if people are still wearing their masks, contactless access control so that they don't have to press any button, the system will just see their face and let them in. Managing social distancing, evacuation management. If you have to evacuate a place, how do you know that everyone is out and one person isn't left hiding in the toilet somewhere, for instance, and so on. And finally, something called fever check to detect if people have a fever. We'll discuss some of these, but first let me just talk about social distancing. So how do we know that people stand far apart? And this is an example. In fact, it's from an airport. It shows you people in red are too close together. People in green are sufficiently far apart. So a system like this would tell people, what's happening in their environment, and then they can take action based on what they want to do. Let's talk about fever detection. Everyone with a fever does not have COVID-19. But a study by the WHO identified that 88% of people with COVID-19 exhibit fever as their first symptom. So you don't know you have COVID-19 until you start exhibiting a fever. And another factor that came out in that report was that fevers you don't just have a fever and you have a high fever right through the day and night. It actually changes during the day. In the morning, you may be quite normal, but late in the morning, your fever peaks. And that's also interesting because people, you might have seen places where they check people as they walk into the office. Every morning they'll check their temperature and they'll say, now you can go in. Well, that's pretty useless if in the morning everybody's normal and then at 11 o'clock, half of them are sick. So what could we do about that? So we developed a fever detection mechanism that uses a thermal camera, which can see the person's face and determine their temperature. Now, there are many thermal cameras around, primarily from Chinese companies. There's one US company called Fleur that does this as well. But they're all manual systems. They're just cameras. They can see a person, but they need a couple of people standing at the monitors, watching these people to make sure that they catch someone who has a fever. The real cost of these systems is not in the camera. Cameras are very expensive, thermal cameras. They cost something like $20,000 by the time you put together the whole system. But the real cost is not in the camera. It's in the people who have to stand there watching the monitor. And over a year, the cost of operating the camera is about $240,000. It is more than 10 times the cost of the camera itself. So we said to make this cost effective, we need to build an automated system where you do not need people standing there watching cameras. For instance, let me give you an example. If you had an airport with 100 gates, you would need 100 cameras, which means in a manual system, you would need 200 people standing there watching the cameras. That's a huge cost. If you could have one person, a paramedic, who could handle all these 100 cameras, that would make a big difference, right? And so that's what we built. We built an automated system where a single paramedic could cover a large number of thermal cameras. Also, we needed a system that could operate in an uncontrolled environment. The traditional cameras can see a person close up, one at a time, and test them for a fever. We wanted a system that would work in any environment like this. Let me actually show you a little video to show you that system working. For some reason, it has gone to sleep. Excuse me a second, I will just restart it and hope that Microsoft will, okay. Let's get back to where we were. Give me a second and we will restart this. There. Right. You should be able to see my screen again. So we were talking about cameras that can handle crowds at long distances, and I showed you at least the image on that. Let me tell you how it works. So first you have a camera that will watch an environment, and it'll determine if someone in that environment has a fever. It'll enroll the person's face. If somebody has a fever, it'll ignore everybody else. It'll enroll only the person who has a fever. And then, but there's no one there to catch him. So it'll track that person from camera to camera right through whatever environment they are in. And it'll send the information to the paramedic on his smartphone and tell him on a map where that person is right now. And as I said before, everybody's face is redacted, so there's total privacy. Only the person with the fever, his face is visible, and only to the paramedic. So the paramedic can then find him, check him out, and manage that environment. So the benefit of a system like this is it needs far fewer paramedics. It is reliable, scalable, because you can now have 100 cameras without having to worry about how many people you need to manage them. It tends to use existing camera infrastructure for everything except the fever detection. It is privacy protected, and it helps to reduce queues because you don't have people standing there waiting to be checked. So that was an example of how the system can be used in the pandemic, and it is being deployed around the place. Our overall systems have been deployed in about 60 countries around the world, and we have something like 69 patents across 7 geographies. So a lot of the things that we talked about today are uniquely available just from us. Of course, there are other big companies that specialize in certain things, like Google does what is called deep learning, which is a particular type of thinking. But this overall multisensory AI is something unique to us. And in fact, if you bought a smart city solution from someone like Microsoft or Cisco or Dell or Oracle and so on, you would in fact be getting our system. In fact, you see Huawei over there and you'd say, Huawei? Hasn't Mr. Trump said we are not going to buy anything from Huawei? Well, whether they buy it from Huawei or from Microsoft, they will still get our system. So the system is universally recognized. Gartner last year rated us #1 in this type of technology. We support our customers around the world, including in North America, with teams in Toronto, US, Mexico, and so on. And just a little about us. We are 19 years old, so we are considered the old man of the industry. We are the world's oldest video analysis company around. But we are still a teenager, of course. So with that, I hope I gave you a reasonable feel for what artificial intelligence does today, can do, and how it can be used during the current pandemic situation. I'd like to now hand over back to Zoran so that he can take any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kanga, for that wonderful presentation. And I now open the floor for any questions. If you could unmute your mic one at a time and ask those questions so we can have everyone ask, that'll be great.
Rustom, in this pandemic that's been going on, how many extra sales have you seen come through? So is it been a wake-up call for governments and so forth, airports all around the world to say, hey, we have to look at our border security in a more controlled environment? And as you said, it's a society has to make a change and decision about privacy against the safety for all. So have you seen a big spike in that over the recent months?
As I mentioned, the airports, especially the privately run airports, are all going broke right now. So they have no money to spend on anything. They don't have money to spend on the traditional types of technologies that they would have purchased. However, they all realize that they do need to open up soon. So they are, I think many of them are now looking at this fever detection type capability, at the social distancing capability, contactless access management and things like that. And yes, we have seen that type of thing taking off now. Of course, this is a very new technology. The whole pandemic is only 3 months old. So we are certainly seeing a lot of interest in that, and the first systems have started going out in the US, in the Middle East, in Asia, and so on. In fact, in 2 weeks' time, it's being trialed by the US Secret Service in the White House, which is interesting when they don't believe they have a pandemic going on right now.
Dr. Kanga, just curious, how does the technology work with masks?
Well, we actually have a very unique type of face recognition system, which does not use the traditional what they call deep learning technologies that people like Google use. And so we can actually recognize people even when they have their masks on. Now, obviously, it depends on the type of mask. People have asked us, can you recognize someone, a woman wearing a burqa? And the answer is, of course, you can't, because if a human can't do it, then a computer won't be able to do it, because after all, artificial intelligence is only about the computer attempting to think like a human, right? But if a person's wearing a mask just on his mouth, yes, you would recognize him to a lower accuracy than you would normally, just like a human. A human would recognize a person like that with slightly lower accuracy, and so would the computer.
So if there are no other questions, I have another question for you. You just mentioned that the technology is not based on kind of deep learning, or is it not based on machine learning type of technologies?
No, it is. It is. The difference is that, say, someone like Google uses deep learning, but they use only deep learning. As I mentioned, humans actually think in very complex ways. Deep learning is about memory and experience, right? But humans think in very much more complex ways, and we have incorporated many of those other types of thinking into our technology. Let me give you an example. If you wanted to recognize a dog, you would give your computer 1,000 images of dogs, 10,000 images of dogs, and at the end of that, when the next dog comes in, you would say, that's a dog. And that's how deep learning works, right? Because it remembers it builds it into its memory, it understands the main characteristics of dogs, and it'll know that that's a dog when it comes in. However, let's say we wanted to do suicide detection, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
How would you do suicide detection? You can't get 10,000 people to commit suicide for you so that you have a data set that is big enough to do your deep learning. So how would a human know that somebody's about to commit suicide, right? He uses other types of thinking to understand that this person is about to commit suicide. And so it's those other aspects of human thinking that we've incorporated into our system. So it's not that we do not use deep learning, it's just that we use that as one component in a bigger mix.
Understand.
Rustom,
Yes.
I noticed quite a bit of security issues, and that's fine. But I think the privacy and confidentiality aspects seem to be getting a lot of attention in the media. And people like you with this kind of background that you've just given us in the last half an hour or so, I think you don't get that kind of airtime. A lot of people, like in Western Australia, for example, are up in arms saying that, there's all these facial recognition things and stuff like that, and, catching speeding drivers and stuff like that. So there's a lot of negative aspects of the artificial intelligence which keep coming out in the media. But the artificial intelligence community, like you and some of the others especially, aren't sort of coming out and giving the positive aspects of it.
Well, all technologies can be used for good or for evil. A knife can be used to kill someone. It can also be used to cut a birthday cake. So you don't ban birthday parties for that reason. You, as a society, you decide, you set some norms on how you want to use the technology. Similarly, nuclear technology can be used for medicinal purposes, for curing cancers. It can also be used to make bombs. And I think as a society, we've got to discuss and we've got to establish the regulations, the rules for using any of these technologies. And in the European Union, for instance, they have some new legislation called GDPR, which is for privacy protection. And that's actually very good legislation, and we support it because, you and I are, we are concerned about our privacy as well. So it's good to have regulation that ensures that the technology cannot be misused. But at the same time, the technology has, the regulations have to be flexible enough to allow us to use it for the purposes where it is useful. As I said, for those people in Western Australia, yes, you set the rules to ensure that it is not misused, but if a child is lost, would you not want the best technology available to be able to find the child immediately, rather than causing it trauma and causing its parents trauma and so on? So that's a society decision, a decision that all of us have to make together.
And I guess my question was more related to the fact that the industry, the AI industry, needs to be out there, like how you've done today. You've shown us all the benefits, not only financial, but even health-wise, et cetera, security-wise, which is a concern for most countries nowadays. So my question was more not that how we use the technology, but how the industry and leaders like you can project a more balanced view of artificial intelligence. Because when I talk to people, they say, oh, it can be used and this and that. So I think the negativity comes out much clearer than the positive aspects of it. That was my take from that.
Well, I think the press likes to talk about negative things more than they like to talk about the positive things. So yes, and probably it's our responsibility, people like me, to communicate some of these messages more, more widely.
Dr. Kanga, the gunshot analytics is used in Chicago to identify gunshots to send police over there immediately. And I'm wondering if Hong Kong has banned Air India flights coming in for 2 weeks. Is that due to analytics of visitors visiting Hong Kong?
I don't know why Hong Kong has banned any particular types of flights into Hong Kong. I'm sure they might have many other reasons for it. I don't think it's because of the analytics, because there's nothing particular about Air India flights versus anybody else's flights. It's probably more a political decision of some sort.
They said it was due to COVID-19 cases.
Well, they probably just believe there are more sick people in India than anywhere else. Maybe they should be banning flights from the US as well. There are a lot of COVID cases there.
Rustom,
Yes,
since you've been in this field, as you say, you're 19 years in this field. What do you see as the new things on the horizon in the two fields of education, as well as the field of medicine? Because obviously this pandemic has shaken up higher ed also in all education in significant ways. But also, medicine seems to be moving to using much more AI. What do you see as the trends in these two fields?
Well, let's talk about them separately. Education, our traditional AI technologies have already been used in education for a number of things. For instance, determining attendance in the class, and just managing the university environment, making sure that people are protected, they are safe, they're not attacked when they're walking at night and on the campus and things like that. So there are many traditional ways in which the technology has been used already in education. I haven't really thought about whether it can be used for teaching purposes. Maybe it can, but certainly we have not been addressing that. In terms of medicine, a lot of what we do in terms of video analysis and so on can be used in medicine. For instance, doctors are always looking at X-rays and MRI scans and all that sort of stuff. And it's actually a long and tedious process. Doctors can make mistakes because they may or may not see certain things on the screen. So computers can help over there. We have not got involved in medicine at that level with video analysis, because that's actually quite a long and extensive process. One has to do lots of clinical trials and so on, which is a very expensive process for us. So we've stayed away from that. We have been looking right now, as I mentioned, at using smell analysis for medicine, mainly because the early indications are that it is a precursor to things like CT scan. So with a CT scan, you can tell, a physician can tell if somebody has lung cancer, at least the early stages and so on. If you could tell if somebody has lung cancer before it is clearly visible on a CT scan, then that really is beneficial to the person, right? But that is still very early days. As I said, it's something that we've been looking at. We haven't done it yet because, again, it's quite an expensive thing to do in terms of all the clinical trials and so on. And for a small company like ours, there's only so many things we can do.
Small.
Yeah,
I have a
Rustom,
question. Rustom,
Yes, go ahead.
you briefly mentioned something about your technology being used at the White House. Could you expand a little bit on that?
Yes. This is for our fever detection system. It is, it's useful for anyone in any environment where they have large numbers of people gathering, because you want to know if somebody's got a fever so you can send them home. And the Secret Service has decided that they need it for themselves. So they are trialing that in the White House to see if it can be used by them.
I have a question. Rustom, is your company listed on stock exchange or?
No. We are a small company. We are a privately held company. We do have operations in the US and so on, but we are a private company. We are not listed yet.
Dr. Kanga, two questions. One was, is your system based on supervised or unsupervised learning? And the second one is, how do you work on eliminating bias? Bias is a major concern in the AI field right now.
So let's explain to everyone what is supervised and unsupervised learning. And the answer, of course, is that we use both. What is supervised learning? Let's take a small child. If you taught it to read and you said C-A-T is cat, B-A-T is bat, H-A-T is hat, and little by little you teach it, and over time the child will learn. And that is supervised learning. Unsupervised learning is where you give it the complete works of Shakespeare and you say, well, figure it out. And hopefully after 20 years, it's figured it out, but it takes a lot more effort, and you may not get exactly the outcome that you want. So both types of technologies are available, and in different environments, they are useful, right? So for instance, I mentioned earlier that the system is continuously learning. It understands when it goes from day to night because the light changes. And the system needs to know that just because the light is changing, it doesn't mean that there's an event going on, that sort of thing. So that is unsupervised learning. Our system can handle that because it's continuously learning by itself. But for the other example I gave you, where you want to detect a dog and you say, is this a dog or is this not a dog? You give it 1,000 pictures of dogs. That is supervised learning, where you label each image and you say, this is a dog. And so the computer knows it's a dog, and after it's seen 1,000 of them or 10,000 of them, it knows that it's a dog. So both, we use both types of supervised and unsupervised learning depending on the environment in which, the application, depending on what the application requires. Your next question was about bias. Bias when people talk about bias, they've usually talked about it in the context of face recognition, and usually in the context of deep learning systems. Deep learning is where, as we said, you give it 1,000 pictures of dogs and you train it. The reason there has been bias in some cases is that, for instance, if you've trained your system on white Caucasian faces,
Right.
then your system may not be able to handle
Black.
Chinese or Asian or other faces like that, right? Just because you have not trained it to cope with those things.
Right.
And similarly, you find there are many Chinese systems around that have been trained on 1 billion Chinese people, but they can't cope with other types of faces, right? So deep learning systems can, in fact, develop a bias based on your data set. We've addressed that by using technologies other than deep learning for our face recognition, which actually makes the system much more computing light. So we don't need all these GPUs from companies like NVIDIA and things like that. It is very computing light. And it also does not suffer from the sort of bias that you get from deep learning systems.
Awesome.
But you're right, AI systems can have a bias depending on the data set that you use.
Right. That's right. Thank you.
Any questions?
Rustom, I'm curious about how big your company is, how many employees you have, and what you think when you hire an employee or when you support an employee. Do you fire people quickly or do you keep them a long time? Do you expect complete loyalty from them? What's it like for you as the leader of the company? And then another set of questions I would have would be, the thing that's so fascinating about your technology and developing this technology is that it seems like you're working in a whole area that deals with the production of knowledge and how you make knowledge and get knowledge and know something. What are your inspirations from traditional thinkers or philosophers or from the Zoroastrian tradition when it comes to how we know things? So epistemologically, what would be your inspirations there?
Gosh, you asked a bunch of different complex questions. Let me try and answer them. Firstly, in terms of size of the company, we are actually quite a small company. Overall, we do have offices, as I said, in about 10 different countries. We do R&D in 4 of them. So we have an R&D capability in Toronto, in Sydney, in India, in Delhi, and in Hong Kong. But overall, we'd have under 100 people. Okay. You also asked, where do we draw our inspiration from? Well, I don't know if we drew our inspiration from any sort of great philosophers or anything like that. I think what tends to happen is my partner and I, we sometimes watch TV and we see CSI and we say, oh, that'd be nice to do. And then we take it to our engineering manager and we say, that's what we want. And he says, that's impossible. That's Hollywood. You can't get it here. And then we argue about it for a little while. And after 6 months, he's got halfway there. And that's how we develop the technology.
Hi, Rustom. This is Farokh here.
Farokh, how are you?
Just fine. I saw a slide with something about evacuation. Right now, we're having a lot of fires. In fact, the highway you drove down on the other side of that hill is pretty much on fire, and they're evacuating a lot of people. Are any of the smart cities using any of that kind of a software to monitor evacuations and anything related to that?
Okay. Incidentally, just for those who don't know, Farokh is an old school friend of mine. He went to IIT with me, and once upon a time in our youth, we used to play together in a band. So your question is, do smart cities use it for evacuation purposes? We've done about 8 or 10 smart cities in the US, but none of them use it for evacuation purposes. Evacuation, the way our system works, it's more designed for large buildings. So if you had a skyscraper like the Empire State Building or something like that, and there was a fire over there, you would want to make sure that everyone got out. And so that's the sort of thing where you can have cameras everywhere, where you know how many people went in, how many people came out, and so on. So that's how the evacuation management system works. In a smart city environment, I think it may be too uncontrolled to use that sort of system, because you just wouldn't have enough cameras to know how many people were in that area in the first place. I don't think cities use surveillance to that extent.
Exactly, yes.
And you probably wouldn't want them to use surveillance to that extent anyway. As I said, we all value our privacy as well.
Well, just a thought, because I have a friend who's stuck in Hawaii because of COVID, can't come back, and his whole neighborhood is on fire. He wants to see if his house is up or down.
Well, maybe he needs a camera outside his own house, watching his own house, which he can
I know.
monitor on his smartphone.
Well, there are a lot of issues. He doesn't have power, and also a lot of cameras are catching on fire too. So that's kind of an interesting situation.
Yes.
Have you considered any of that, where cameras get disabled?
Well, the cameras are the eyes. So if the cameras are working, then the brain, which is the computer, can do its analytics. In our system, we do have a camera health check system. So it'll tell you if the camera is working or not working. And not just if it's working, it'll also tell you if somebody's moved it or if a spider's walked in front of it and so on. So it can do all those things. But once it's down, if it burns out, that's like somebody blinding you. Once you're blind, you can't see.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm really enjoying your presentation.
Thank you, Farooq.
This is Arnaz Manikshana from New Jersey.
Hi, Arnaz.
How are you? Very interesting. Thank you, Dr. Kanga. I just received a call from Edeldower, and he sends his apologies. He had a little situation. He lost his hearing aid in a store, and he was looking for it. So he couldn't make the presentation, but he will watch the recording, he said. So I just wanted to... Thank you.
Thank you, Arnaz.
Lovely evening. Thank you very much. Bye, Australia.
Thank you.
So, Rustom, I have a quick question. You said your system isn't very heavy from a technology perspective. You don't need any of the, so many GPUs and so forth. So are these self-contained systems that you guys are selling? So in other words, it's a camera with maybe a PC or something attached, which has got enough to drive it in a localized area? Or does it have to come back to some back-end server system for its...
It depends on what you're doing and how many cameras and so on. Essentially what we have is software, and software needs a computer to run on. So for a single camera, you can actually have it on that little device that I showed you, and that's probably good enough. If you had a very large system with hundreds of cameras, you can do the computing wherever there's a computer. You can do it in the cloud, you can do it in, it's partly in the cloud, partly on premise, partly at the edge. Right? So where you do the computing does not really matter to us. It's just that we use less computers overall to do whatever computing we need to do.
So these patents which your company has is mainly around algorithms, is it?
It's about algorithms, it's about processes, it's about a number of things like that. It's, for instance, one of our patents is on doing analytics in crowded areas. A lot of people can do things in empty scene. So if somebody leaves a bag in an empty space, there are 100 companies who can find the bag. But if it's in a crowded place like a railway station or an airport and 1,000 children walk in front of the bag, then only we will find it. So it's that sort of technology.
Dr. Kanga, AI is also traditionally used to detect events pretty much after they occur. Is there any way in which the industry is moving towards preempting events? So, for instance, before you get cancer, you might do a breath test and be able to say you are more susceptible to cancer, start taking preventive measures. And it doesn't have to apply to cancer. It could apply to forest fires. It could apply to natural disasters, whatever.
Yes. Yes, of course. I think the technology essentially, you're teaching the technology to the computers to think like a human would. And if a human can preempt something based on his understanding of the environment, then you can teach the computer to do the same thing. So as I said, using breath to analyze, say, lung cancer is an interesting example. Today, you would go to the doctor because you had a pain in the chest or you couldn't breathe or something like that. And he would do a CT scan and determine whether he could see any spots on your lungs. If you could analyze that and give a diagnosis before you could really see spots on the lungs, then that's preempting it, right? And that's what some of these technologies are attempting to do.
Rustom, this is a Rustom engineer from Houston. Wonderful presentation, thank you. One quick question. You mentioned something about the smell technology. And I was wondering, as a owner, let's say, or CEO, I don't know your position there, but whatever of the company, would your focus be more on making simpler systems for different industries, or would it be breaking new vistas with new technology? Well, what is your focus basically? Because there are so many things you can do with the knowledge you have. Especially in the smell technology, I'm thinking about food manufacturing. That can, a very simple system can take care of a lot of things. It doesn't require a very high sophisticated algorithm or anything of the sort. And so just wondering.
Yes, I suppose, these systems could be used for anything. It could be used to, to tell whether your wife is cooking dhandar or dhansak in the kitchen. Right? But, I suppose our focus has been on trying to balance the what the technology can do with what the market is looking for, right? So there are probably segments of the market that might find use in the technology, and if they can afford to pay for it, we focus on it. So for instance, we do traffic management just because a lot of cities are looking for that, right? It helps them. They want to reduce congestion and so on. So there's a demand for that type of thing. But there are probably areas that we don't do, even though they might be useful. For instance, as I said, in the medical space, just because it just costs so much to do that, and we don't have the wherewithal to do it, even if we know how to do it. If we, right now as a company, we don't have any external investors. We've done it all ourselves. But if we, maybe for some of these areas, if we had the right sort of investment from an external source, we may be able to afford to do some of these things that we wouldn't have done in the past.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, with smell technology, you could probably use it for perfumeries as well as coffee and tea. I mean, a lot of people insure their nose for $500,000. I mean, it's a job, right? And you would, something like that would probably, I don't know whether it would augment it or represent a threat to such individuals, but
Yes.
it is present. And yeah, I'm assuming this is more than just a scratch and sniff technology that you see in little magazines, like a little card.
Yes.
You know, this is beyond that, right?
Yes,
You're
yes,
talking.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, of course. Yes, and I'm sure there are a million applications, and our customers themselves find applications themselves. You say, here, I've got this technology for one thing, and they say, oh, but I could use it for something else. And for instance, in the wine tasting business, people smell the wine and smell the bouquet and so on. Maybe there's a potential there, who knows? And we might put wine tasters out of business. At this stage, we haven't got into that type of space.
Hi, Rustom.
Yes, hi.
This is Zareen.
Oh, hi, Zareen.
Hi. I was just wondering, you said that all the other companies that offer artificial intelligence services, they all sell your products. So do they have to order them through you?
No, they don't all sell our products. There are many companies like Google and so on who have their own capabilities.
Okay.
We do have, lots of competitors. In fact, when Gartner did their analysis, they I think evaluated something like 100 video analysis companies. Well, when I listed those companies, what I was doing was showing that some of these companies, like Dell, like Intel, and Cisco, and so on, they use our capability. They tend to, yes, some of them rebranded, some of them use our own branding, and they offer it to their customers. And when they do that, they either license it from us or they buy it from us.
Okay, sounds good. I have to leave, but I wanted to thank you very much for a very interesting and informative presentation. I certainly understand your business a whole lot better now.
Thank you, Zari.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, Dr. Kanga, this is Pervin. Would you be willing to, give your contact information in case we have some questions that we'd like to ask after the presentation?
Of course, certainly. I think through Jimmy of Medora of the WZCC, he has all my contact details, and he can share them with all of you. I'd be very happy to take any questions, or if some of you would like to get involved in some of these things, we'd be,
Thank you.
Rustom?
Yes.
Not to put you on the spot, but the type of work you do is good for, when applied correctly, good for humanity as a whole. Is your company looking at making a lot of these things which you all build and patent as open source, so that other people can take it on and expand and grow this whole area, so we, work towards a better society?
The answer is yes and no. On most of the technology, we make it so that we can sell it,
sure,
make a living. But there are some capabilities. For instance, we've got a whole system where you can find lost children. And that finding lost children capability is something we've made available free of charge to any organization that is in the business of finding lost children. And in fact, we started on that. There's a gentleman by the name of John Walsh in the US who runs a program called America's Most Wanted. And he actually started that program after his own little boy was abducted and murdered. And he was driving this organization called the National Center for Lost and Exploited Children in the US. And so through them, we got involved in building this technology for them. And we make that available to, police forces and many countries around the world at no charge. So things like that where we feel that, it's something that we would want society to do anyway. We do offer that, but not everything else. Right? If you want to manage the queues in LAX, then we make LAX pay for it.
Sure. Thank you.
Any more questions? All right then. Yep, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Rustom, for a wonderful presentation. I've been sort of involved in this area for a while from different perspectives. And I think you gave a very good introduction, good overview, and I think it was an excellent presentation. Well done. And thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in this wonderful presentation. And of course, a big thank you to Dr. Kanga for doing this for us. We really are very grateful to you. I would have to hand it over to Jimmy now.
Thank you. Everyone's already said all the words I wanted to say of appreciation, but from the WZCC Australia side of things, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and for your involvement. I know you're very busy at the moment, and you've really, just for me at least, and for a lot of people I know, we'll spread that through the recording as far and wide as possible. I think you've just sort of made it very clear that the negative aspects of artificial intelligence are being balanced by very positive initiatives that you and your industry have been taking. So on behalf of the WZCC Australia Sydney chapter, I thank you very much for your time. I thank every one of you. And for you, Rustom, I'm going to, on behalf of the, can I see this? Can you see this? This is a WZCC lapel pin, which originated from Rohington Revetna, but now we have that in every chapter. And as a token of our appreciation, I'd like to present this to you. Not virtually, I will come to your place because you're only 10 minutes away from where I am. I will come and give it to you at the earliest this thing. But thank you all. Thank you, Zoran. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And hope to hear from you. Anyone wants to know Rustom's details, contact details, please send me an email or a WhatsApp message. Parveen, you and I are in contact, but if anybody else wants to, please let me know and I will definitely forward those contact details to you all. So anyway, good night everyone in Northern America, and good morning and good afternoon in Australia and New Zealand. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.